And now we move for to the last panel of the day. It's called Beyond the Scoreboard, How Technology and Innovation Can Drive Sport Integrity. We have here with us Daniel Hubert, and Kevin Benedict is moderating. We have by Zoom, joining us by Zoom, Sandra Lopez, Richard Ayers, and Nadia Banks. And I call Kevin, please, on stage, joined by Daniel Hubert, for this last panel of this morning. The stage is yours. Thank you.
Water? One mic.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Today, as they just announced, Beyond the Scoreboard, innovation and technology and how it can drive sports integrity. We're going to have fun. We have some just amazing guests today. We'll let them kind of introduce themselves as we jump into it. But I think it's really early in the morning for some of our guests that'll be joining us. So it's going to be interesting to see how this goes for everyone here. So I'm going to just start out, and Sandra, if you're there, let me just start out with you and ask you a question here, just to test your early morning capabilities. Most of us have watched Brad Pitt in Moneyball, and we've seen what innovation can do and the use of analytics and data and how it can actually change a sport and the economics of sport. What do you see out there that's really our 2022 version of that Moneyball situation in sports?
I mean, well, good morning, good afternoon. It is, I don't even know what time it is. I'm in Chicago. It's about 5 a.m. I do have my coffee. I do think there's a big theme around data. And if you think about like F1 as an example, you have about 200 sensors, you get about 50 billion points of data. And how the question is always, how do you contextualize the data and how do you extract that data? And the big conversation, at least for many of us, is moving away from data privacy and going into data dignity in terms of you're using that data for competitive advantage to obviously every millisecond matters. But what does it mean for the athletes themselves? And we at Microsoft have a very big belief that data is a human right. And so while it's not necessarily specifically around Moneyball because you can use the data to draw insights and take advantage, I also believe there's a conversation to be had as data as a human right, data from a dignity perspective, and what role does data as it relates to the athletes play. So lots of topics, lots of things to solve, not very easy. And I look forward to having the conversation with my various colleagues.
All right. Nadia, let's move over to you. What do you see out there, which is 2022's version of Moneyball?
Yeah, hi everyone. Nice to be here. I think it's 4 a.m. for me, but it's great. So really, data's been around for a while, and people are more comfortable with making decisions with data. What we're finding at Quintar is, what we want to do is we want to be able to layer that data in the real world, so you're able to get all the data at your fingertips without having to be distracted and look elsewhere, or take a break to go get the data. So we're finding that data is just going to start becoming more accessible faster and faster and more real time. So it's not just about, going home, rewatching some film, looking at some analytics and making some decisions. It's going to be making decisions in real time that can impact either the quality of the athlete or the quality of the game. So I think that's going to be the biggest thing, is how quickly we get access to that data and how we're able to view it.
Thank you for that. Richard, let's get your thoughts. What do you see out there, which is 2022's version of Moneyball in sports?
Good morning. Good morning or good afternoon now, and no excuses. I'm in London, I'm afraid. I couldn't make it to Lisbon. But I had the embarrassing credit of doing a talk at South by Southwest, the US conference in 2012, when I had been at Manchester City Football Club for a couple of years running their digital innovation stuff. And I came up with this concept of datatainment. And I apologize because it's just a horrendous word. I mean, I don't know what I was thinking. But fundamentally, this, forward wind 10 years, and we are in a really interesting time where that data that Sandra and Nadia were talking about, it has an impact on participation of sport. It has audience engagement, and of course the performance elements from an athlete's point of view. That quantified self-participation stuff has really accelerated, into pelotons and mirrors and watches and everything. And it's really not terribly long until we happily put a chip in ourselves on a regular basis. Glasses are the thing that everybody's talking about at the moment with augmented reality data coming in, but there's a lot of that going on, and chips in bats and in boots and monitoring and all of that, which is interesting. That starts connecting up into the performance world. There are some lovely, interesting projects. Famously in soccer, Brentford Football Club is running a Moneyball style recruiting athletes and players and training model. But there is this delicate crossover where you start to talk about the data being sensitive commercially or sensitive personally, and because it's medical data effectively. You start looking at an athlete's ability to sprint is slightly denuded over the years, and that affects his commercial value, and also it's his personal medical data. It starts to become complicated. But then you start also to see interesting things, for example, around virtual reality. And there's a really nice little company doing interesting things called Rezel. And really, they built this system for rehabilitation. When a player can't kick a ball or move terribly well, you can have a headset on and you can be using that to be still training your mind, still thinking about your perception and your peripheral vision and your reaction times and all that kind of stuff. So there's sort of layers of technology that have come in there. And that's before we even get to the fundamental challenges of the attention economy, where we're all just trying to talk to an audience as a sport. We're trying to engage them in our sport. And the challenges around that, and that drives the revenue in sport in so many ways. All sorts of challenges around that. And the data can bring you much closer as a fan, much closer to the experience, which is really where you want to be. You want to be right on that pitch or on that court with that athlete. And I'm going to stop there because there's so much more of that to talk about.
I almost feel bad because I've been here since the opening of this session of this event, and just heard all the challenges that we have to face today. And now we're going to, project ourselves forward, Dan, and bring all those problems to today as well. So we're just going to keep dumping problems on. Because when we look into the future, just in doing a little bit of research, I'm a futurist at TCS, and a lot of the stuff we do is we read what other futurists are looking at, what other industries are talking about. And the things are incredible. They're talking about at the very highest level in the future having leagues that are a natural athlete, an enhanced athlete league, and then a machine league. And having these, and then leagues where there's combinations of all these kinds of things. Just the kind of challenges that we read about trucks that can pull up and all of completely surrounding the pitch will be a set of cameras that can project and share the game in 3D in the future, where you can freeze a play, inject yourself as an avatar, and then play out the rest of that play. All kinds of these fun things here, but just think how that's gonna screw up other aspects of the business and make us have to think through this as a community. So let's just turn back to you, Dan, and what do you see out there as the Moneyball kind of evolution that we're seeing in 2022?
Okay, so good afternoon. It's a privilege to be here, so thank you very much. I think I can only add a little bit on top of what's already been said, because I think there's an enormous amount from the first four contributors. But I think for me, it's very much around IoT and wearables, it's about that real-time information around not just the performance of the athlete at that time in terms of how far perhaps they throw or quickly they run or they jump, but it's also things such as nutrition. How do you get the electrolytes right? How do you replenish, especially on very long distance type sports, but also maybe then getting into details, and very interesting, I hadn't really considered it, when you get into the very sort of personal information about how does a player perform in either warmer weather, colder weather, high altitude. You may find you start doing team selections based on this particular player is better in these types of conditions because their body is built that way, they respond better. Or in terms of recovery, we know that on this particular occasion, you've lost more salts, you need to replenish. And I think there's a lot that can be done around really helping increase the performance or be very specific around the people that you want to perform in a team or in a particular environment at any one time. And I think that's going to make a huge difference. I think just picking up on some of your commentary, I think the balance of all of this is just making sure that we don't put too much IT in there, too much technology. Okay, because I think this is one of the things we mentioned earlier on, that one of the points of sport, as much as anything, is the entertainment and the emotion. Is that just, the immediacy? How much do you want to, say, be present as opposed to being involved indirectly through a camera or an avatar? And I think that's the balance, is how much do people want to actually just say, okay, I just want to be there and in the moment, living it. The data streams, they're nice to see now and then. And I think that's that balance. How do we avoid overwhelming consumers with too much data, which perhaps distracts from the actual event in itself and the entertainment and the emotion of the moment, but also giving them, I think quite rightly, the value adds, the interests, the real deep dive analytics that the really mega fans want. So it's a balance. I think it's a real balance. But there's so much opportunity out there. It's just finding those sweet spots that add value and keep that entertainment. That's the real point of the sport for me, is the entertainment and the emotion.
Thanks, Dan. So I'm going to jump back over to Nadia just to make sure she stays awake tonight, this morning. And Nadia, let me just, if this was us around a water cooler talking about 2022, let's look 5 or 10 years ahead, kind of to the mega trends in sports. What are some of the big changes, do we think, or the big technology and innovation changes that we think are going to be introduced into sports over the next 5 or 10 years? Nadia, what's your thoughts?
So from the lens of how I look at the world, I think one of the bigger things we're going to start to see is, as AR glasses become more prevalent, you're going to start to see how that actually helps bring people closer to the game. So, similar to the things we were just talking about, like you don't want to be distracted from the game. You want to actually be more present. And it is going to be important as we look at new technologies and the way we display it, that, it isn't just all shiny bells and whistles and really cute things that people see initially, but then kind of die down. It's important that these are going to be more organic and seamless into how you view the game. But we really believe that it's the additional information that you're able to bring into the game to just help enhance the game. Also, as we start to look at, whatever takes on through betting, through NFTs and all this, that's really going to start to just change how people interact and view the game too.
Thank you for that. Richard, let's jump over to you. How do you see sports changing significantly or evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, there's so many things we could point out. I mean, as Nadia says, the NFTs, blockchain, opportunity in terms of having transparent records and data and being, I think that's really interesting. I think that more immediately is the live streams, and whether it be FIFA Plus or the Zone or Endeavor Streaming or whoever delivering services which are sort of at a next level in the way that true OTT is, of course, not just streaming. It is adding a whole bunch of services on top of that to enhance the experience and bring you closer, which is core to it. I will throw in another slightly random one, but as well as chairing 7 League, which is part of the IMG, and we do sort of digital marketing, I also started up a small immersive experience company because I'm fascinated by the stories of yesteryear, those great iconic moments that really transport us. And it's one of the things that sport doesn't really deal with hugely, an occasional on this day in history post, or maybe if you're lucky, a Netflix documentary, but great moments that are incredibly inspirational and that we all emotionally connect with. And yet mostly it's sort of dormant IP sitting there. So I think, well, what we're trying to do with Rematch is bring those moments back to life using real physical world experience, but also VR and AR. And I think that starts to become another interesting angle for sport as well, is how can it mine its incredible archive of great moments, which is really what people are connected to from a fan point of view, and bring those back to life to be able to bring people closer to the sport. That's what it's all about, up close and personal. Feels like to me that's the catchphrase I use for the next sort of 5 to 10 years. Audiences, fans, athletes, they want to be really closely, personally connected with it, with tailored services coming to them, that they feel like they're in it. They want to be in it and in that moment.
Thank you, Richard. Sandra, let's move over to you. What do you see evolving? How do you see sports evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
I'm going to stick with data. Data is the new oil. It's going to provide competitive insights. But if you think about data and automation, I'd like to leverage a concrete example. Imagine autonomous cars. And autonomous cars over time, if you see the cars of the future, kind of look like they're your living rooms where they have TVs. And then imagine the world of tailgating and the responsibility of teams and organizations to understand that customer digital experience from the moment that they buy their ticket to getting to the game. What does tailgating look like when these cars are going to be like extensions of living rooms? What's going to be inside the game versus outside the game, and the experiences around the game? How do you give data around the specific athletes to individuals that are very personalized? And then how do you protect the data? And so for me, the big thing that we think about as we fast forward 10 years from now, can we please kind of look at the past of what happened with social media and technology? And how do we think about the data that we want to incorporate to enhance the experiences of both those that want to watch and those that play? And then the last thing that I like to add is similar to one of the colleagues, is just because computers can do it, the question is, should they do it? And really thinking about when and how to use technology so that it's much more accessible to all and it helps improve the overall experience, but not lose sight of what makes sports so special. It's the unifier, and it brings everybody together. And I am a little bit concerned of the over-indexing of technology, and so I think we need to be all stewards, those that work in technology, to really answer the question of should technology be used? If so, most of it's going to be grounded on data. How do we leverage data for good and the dignity of all? And think about the entire experience from that very big, from the point of purchasing a ticket, what does, automation look like in terms of automobile? How's that going to change that experience? So there's so many angles that you can unpack. And I think as long as we're starting to think about it now and make sure that we are influencing, we talk about, integrity as part of SIGA, like really thinking about integrity of the data and the technology to make sure that we create a better sporting experience.
Thanks, Sandra. We hear a lot of mention about experience, and that's one of the values of being there in person and feeling the vibration of the stadium and the cheers and the community and camaraderie and the rituals and routines and ceremonies and everything else that go along with the game. But I think the more the VR and the AR and purpose-made third-party studios, if you would, that can bring that same kind of experience into smaller venues, maybe franchised all around a region, so that everyone can feel it in a much smaller environment. At some point, those experiences might get closer and closer together, and then the value shifts. But what do you see coming in the future, Dan?
For me, I think a lot of it is around things like VR. I think I'm a very big Formula One fan, so just building on your point, I've been fortunate to go and see Grand Prix, and to be honest, it's fantastic, but you always end up watching the TV in the end, or trying to watch on your mobile phone, because it's extremely difficult to follow up the track. You obviously don't get the experience, but there's so much now more information available in Formula One, especially as a geek like me, I love it. It's important, it's vital, and I think actually you do get a lot of the excitement, almost, not quite the same, but it's getting close to it. And I think you're right, it's that bringing the two together so that if you aren't able to travel to a particular event, and also we touched on it earlier on, there's obviously environmental impacts of it. You know, if you can have people not having to try and get near to it, they can experience it to not maybe the same or similar level to the people that are actually there, then I think that's a fantastic thing. But I think VR, I think the use of things like helmet cams, I think where any way that you can somehow almost see real time, almost point of view, maybe not all the time, but for certain key points, you know, certain plays, actually see that and see what they're experiencing. I think that's a tremendous way to go. I think that would be of real value to a lot of fans, to be honest with you.
Thank you for that, Dan. The next question, success in sports is often determined by inches, millimeters, milliseconds. How are you seeing the technologies used to authenticate, ensure integrity, and improve sports today? So, with more and more pressure, with more and more money invested in games, it's more and more important to make sure that the results are authentic. What do you see about that, Dan?
Okay, so I think there's a need for more and more tracking on traceability of, particularly where you're using equipment. You know, I think it's very important that when athletes are having to use other equipment, I think that's extremely important that you can ensure that is that really the right piece of equipment that they are using. You know, there's this whole thing around, you know, doping of athletic shoes, you know, these extreme shoes that they have. Now, obviously, that's been done very knowingly, but how do you know that they aren't then perhaps using it on a subterfuge basis? They're putting components in that shouldn't be there. And then how do you know as an official, is this actually the right bit of equipment that I'm supposed to inspect? And is it the right bit of equipment that they actually ended up using? So I think there's a need to start perhaps, without making it too complex, how do you make sure that you can enable officialdom to actually be able to verify what someone's using real time? Spot checks as they're about to go and perform. Is that the right bit of equipment you should be using? Is it giving you something? Because there's always some way with technology now that you can give some advantage. Right? And I think that's a very important part of what needs to be built into ensuring the integrity of what you see is valid, it's real. So I think there's a lot of things around making sure that equipment, components, anything that will give you some form of competitive edge, you're able to validate real time and have a very high level of confidence that, yeah, that is the genuine bit of equipment that you should be using, that has been perhaps previously validated as being okay and acceptable.
Absolutely, and that's something that we've heard time and time again through the sessions here already at the SIGA event here, is the importance of audience trust and fan trust, that it is a level playing field. Let me go to Richard. Richard, what do you see as some of the developments in that area that will ensure the integrity of sports?
Well, I'll be honest and say it's not hugely my area of expertise. However, now I'm going to speak about it, even though it's not. One thing is, obviously in the soccer world, there's a huge amount of focus on the use of VAR and how that's monitored. And that's run by my parent company, IMG, out of Stockley Park. And I think that is increasingly being respected and refined and tailored. How that then is managed when it's user-facing, like in the bowl when they're coming to a stadium or on TV, that's done very differently in different sports. In some cases, you're hearing, ref camera whilst he's having a conversation with the third referee. In other cases, it's completely silent, and then they present you the result out of it. The way cricket, for example, deals with it, it's very different from the way that football would. But I think that is a developing area, and when we talk about trust and integrity, that's core to a lot of what football fans talk about. The other area that I'm interested in, but I think it's one to watch, and to Dan's point, I think the education around this for national governing bodies and federations is going to be super important, because the technology is moving faster than you can hold on to, and they need to be able to verify and stay on top of that. So maybe that's part of the role that SIGA plays, of course, is the backbone of that knowledge and that connection. But an area that I think is interesting in developing, I've heard many a football agent talk about how the transfer system and the data management around athlete performance over the years of a career is somewhat, I think, they use words like antiquated and archaic. And I do think that sort of data management structures that are around there will develop vastly in the next few years. And in particular, I sort of begin to wonder whether there's some sort of, whether the authentication element of that means that you could see a way of using some blockchain style tech with the transparency around that. It may be completely unnecessary. Maybe there's plenty of other ways of maintaining the authenticity of that data. But it's, a point that Sandra was making earlier on, that sort of clarity and understanding of the data in order to be able to protect the integrity is super important.
Great, thanks, Richard. I'm going to jump to the next question here. With fast evolving technology, we're talking about augmented reality and AI and VR and just, image recognition and machine learning, all these kinds of fun things, and robotics. Is there still going to be a need for human refs and umpires and officials to look at the game? Or will there come a time when machines can do it better? Sandra, let's jump to you.
That was the conversation we had last night as part of a board of directors meeting. We were asking, is everything going to be automated, and will there be humans for various jobs? And I would say yes. You need both the art and the science. And the thing around automation and data, it requires continents of data. And you require predictive modeling. So you have to think about what type of data is being ingested. Yes, you can have acceleration, deacceleration, heart rate. You got to consume all the information around weather because that actually predicts outcomes, fan noise. And so my point of view is the question is the accuracy of the data to help make some big decisions, whether a team is going to possibly win or lose, or whether somebody's going to get a gold medal. And so from that perspective, if you think about how much data is required to drive the predictive modeling and to drive the accuracy, you're going to need both the art and the science in the game. And so I absolutely believe that we're going to still require referees, and the data is only going to help them make better informed decisions. And they ultimately still will make the call.
All right, thanks for sharing that, Sandra. I know some of these questions are not easy. Nadia, what are your thoughts?
I think Sandra said it best with the blend of art and science there. A lot of officiating is still nuanced. So if you think of the NBA, a block versus a charge, that's something that you need a human to interpret. So in short, we're just going to keep continuously getting more information, and you're going to help make better decisions and quicker, because one of the important things is you don't want to slow down the game by these lengthy reviews to get the decision right. So, as data is more accurate, the integrity of that data is going to be important, because you have to have the fans' trust too. So as long as you start to have the fans' trust and you're not delaying the game, then you're just going to start to see officials be able to make better decisions quicker, real time. Thanks,
Nadia. Dan, what are your thoughts there?
I think it's been encapsulated perfectly in the previous answers. The honest answer is no. I don't think we'll replace human referees. I think it's absolutely perfectly described. It's an art where science can help with the immediacy of the answer, but in the end, you need someone to interpret the whole aspect of what has happened at any particular event. So no, I think it's just augmenting it rather than replacing.
Let's go to Richard. Richard, what's your thoughts on that?
Didn't we start with me talking about it in the first place, Kevin?
Do you believe that refs, umpires, officials are going to be replaced by machines and AI?
No. There we go. That's I agree. I agree with my learned colleagues here. It'll be in the nuance, but the ability to, if anything, I sort of wish as a fan that it would sort of swing the other way, that the data would be there as our underlying core. It's a sort of foundation, but actually you allow the referee or the umpire to make the human decision on top of it. That's the right decision. There are times when that was technically the correct thing to do, but you feel like the right decision was actually to allow that pass or that goal or that tackle because of the human reasons around it. And I think that's sort of the heart of sport could do with some embellishing.
Thank you for that. When I was doing research on this, as I shared before, You read that in the future, they're looking to be able to produce and show and stream more and more sports at lower and lower levels. So your 6-year-old in their football game, it can be reflected back, and dad who's on the road or mom who's on the road can watch it, because more and more games can be produced because they're in a box. You can open the box, set up the kit, and so you're looking at more and more of these things where even the highlights from the game will be AI driven. The AI systems will recognize in the game what's a highlight and show those in the context of a automatically produced game. So it's fascinating to think forward to a world where that kind of thing can happen. Let's shift over now to experiences. How are the fan experiences going to change over the next 5 or 10 years? And let's go straight to Sandra on that one. We'll start with you.
God, 5 to 10 years and trying to predict the future. I do think overall there is going to be an expectation of technology is something that they're used to, for example, on-time delivery or delivery of groceries. You know, they're going to want concessions be delivered to their seat. And so what I often like to say, sometimes we got to zoom out of the industry, like the sports itself, and look at other industries and look at other mega trends that consumers are going to expect as part of their day-to-day life, right? So mobile ticketing, well, you're going to have all this data, and consumers are willing to enter into a relationship with teams and organizations and give their data so that they can get value in return. And that value you mentioned earlier, like hyper-personalization, giving the highlights based on a particular athlete, maybe not just a team, because now, you know, the next generation is focusing on specific athletes. And so my whole thing is, how do you, maybe Richard, I'm going to go back to data entertainment, the theme that you coined, but you know, understanding that consumers are willing to give up a level of privacy so that their experiences are better, more relevant to them, hyper-personalized. And so what I would say is, I keep on going, data. How do you leverage data to enhance the overall viewing experience, whether you're watching it live in person or watching it on one of the streaming platforms?
Let's go to you, Richard.
Thanks. The experience that you discussed a minute ago, the ability to be able to immediately share. At 7 League, we did some work with the Dutch Football Association, who were pretty advanced in their data management, and they were partnering with the John de Mol, I think it was the last vestiges of the Endemol company at that stage, to create a simple system where if there was a Wi-Fi connection, you could put up a mast. It had a 180-degree camera. It would automatically track the play that was going on. We're talking about in your local club with the 8-year-olds that you mentioned. And then, interestingly, automatically editing and slicing the performance of that 8-year-old, chopping it up and sending it to his family network, or putting it on his social network, or making it available for him to be able to do that when he wanted it, or her at the right time. And really interesting. And so, and that was probably 2 or 3 years ago. So that kind of tech is already there and being implemented. And I think when we think about, the experiences, there's the audience, and then there's the participation experience as well. And that participation being from amateur level all the way through to pro, about how are you experiencing that moment in terms of the data that you're getting fed back, or the visuals that you're being fed back, or is it a heads-up display when you're skiing or when you're mountain biking? All these kinds of aspects start to feed in. And the audience experience, it really divides into either passive or active. And if you're passive, it's more that kind of what's being fed at me and the journey that I'm doing. A little bit, you could argue a little bit like if you've tried any of the 4D cinema that's currently available. I went to see Jurassic Park Dominion, and we're in seats that are being thrown all over the place and things sprayed in your face, and there's wind and there's all of that. That's amazing, and it took that film from a 5 out of 10 to a 7 out of 10, but still, it's still not the world's best film. But that is very much a passive experience, whereas the active experience is the point where I'm saying, okay, let me interact with it. Let me control camera angles, let me be part of it. Maybe I'm influencing the game, maybe I'm part of that sort of closer community. And it does come back to that up close and personal that we've been talking about. There's one issue we haven't mentioned yet, which I think, where I have concerns, is where we start talking about identity. And again, this is very much a SIGA topic. Identity, particularly in some form of digital reality. So it could be 2D on your websites or in video, or it could be the full-on virtual reality experience. But the ability to do deep fakes is a worry and a concern, I think, for everybody. Athletes, right at the core of the business, core of the sport, they need to be protected and educated. They need to be managing their identity around that. Like how the whole twinning of whether that be buildings or indeed individuals can be super positive and powerful and very useful. It can bring audiences closer to that. It can give athletes more to work with, but also it can be potentially a risk, something that needs to be sort of carefully managed. So huge amount of development that's going to go on over the next, I would say probably even the next 3 years, never mind the next 5 to 10.
Nadia, what would you like to share?
So I'm excited by what all this technology is going to bring to the game. Just imagine as a fan, getting to have all that data that is being collected now, contextualized and personalized for you. So as you're viewing it, you get to see whatever you want, and it's coming real time. And imagine you can make, quick little game decisions or bet decisions where, you just quickly place a prop bet and it's all kind of seamless and natural as you watch the game. Or if you're interested in a shoe that a player is wearing, or the entire kit that they have, and you want to quickly purchase it, you click on it, find out where they got it, and then it gets delivered right to your seat. So there's just the technology can make things a lot easier and seamless. It is really important that everyone keeps in mind not to overwhelm the fans, and to do it in a more organic way. And also data rights are always going to be really important. But I think the fun of the interactivity and just making more options available to the fans is going to be great. And then the democratization of technology throughout, all the different leagues and age groups throughout the world.
Dan, what do you think?
I think one of the key ones for me is the hyper-tailored data that fans can pick up on. I think you got to again look at fans' perspective. What are they actually interested in? So again, Formula One fan, you look at the whole Drive to Survive Netflix effect. It's brought in lots of, and I mean this, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but casual fans. They're interested more in they love the racing, but they're interested in the personalities. So their view of the world is much more dictated by interaction with the drivers and what they're doing and their whole social media presence. And I get that completely. So maybe there's a world where they're going to be focused more around, maybe even have sort of VR type relationships with the drivers. Okay, and you can say that to another extreme where you're saying, okay, I want to have an experience with a very good athlete that maybe can do a VR type coaching session with them. All right, and then you get to the real extreme data tailoring, which is you really want to understand what is happening at that critical moment. What are the physics, the dynamics of it, the complexity of what this machine or person is doing? And I think it's providing that whole broad spectrum of choosing what you want to see and having that real-time, pertinent data that's relevant to you. You're interested in that sport. What's dragged you there? Why are you watching it? And I think to me that's the next step, is that really hyper tailorizing of information for people real time.
Yeah, very good. So one thing fans and pundits really love to do is the second guess plays, strategies, defenses, offenses, etc. So how are innovations and technology platforms going to impact these three areas in the future? So the ability to second guess everyone's plays and strategies. Let's go to Sandra.
Sometimes we think that we're smarter than computers, though, and technology. So I everybody mentioned it in the previous question, is with regards to the hyper-personalization of the data that matters most to you and making sure that it's accurate. And so looking at that, as well as, commenting whether or not, whether it was a field goal or not. I mean, I do think it's the whole complementary of the art and science. And so we as fans and consumers of the sport are going to, take advantage of the data that's available to us to drive those friendly debates with my family and friends. And hopefully it's accurate enough so I can win my fantasy football for the NFL season that's coming up, and make the best bets. But I do think it's going to be, consumers are hungry for data, and we also believe that we are more intelligent than the computers themselves. So I think it's going to be this whole blend of the art and science, and how do we leverage that data to our advantage so that we win our upcoming fantasy football.
Thanks, Sandra. Nadia.
So I think, this is one of the key points why people watch sports, right, is to debate. So you can't have efficiency, replaced by computers, because then you kind of take the fun out of watching a sport as a group. I think getting more data and be able to make more educated arguments against your fellow family members or friends is really what's going to happen. And then, you're just going to be able to break down the play or analyze it a bit more. I think when you start getting into the predictive space too, it's going to be interesting. So kind of we're putting your money where your mouth is. If you're so, adamant that a coach made a bad decision and they should have picked a different player or a different play, imagine that you can kind of input that into the system and see how it all plays out, so you're now taking the gamification of your own decisions into another direction. So I think it's just going to make the debates more fun and a little bit more heated maybe, but with some more evidence to back it up.
Richard.
I think these are really interesting points, particularly about the fantasy, predictive analytics. I do wonder whether we'll get to a stage where there's a, what if that happened kind of thing, and the computers in particular will be able to model, down the line and say, here's what happened if he had made that pass or missed that goal, or, the outcomes of the game could be different. And you end up watching a sort of, sliding door style alternate version of what your team could have, should have, would have done, which is interesting, and then definitely gets into there's a whole betting world of challenge that, needs regulation and monitoring around that, which is interesting. But the other the other thing that pops to mind is having done some work with the Turkish Federation in soccer. It's not what I would describe as fun debate. The things get pretty serious pretty quickly when they're talking about it. The most popular webpage on the Turkish Football Association's website, it certainly was when last I worked with them, the referees page, because the fans were so concerned. If they wanted their own team's data, they would get that from their own teams. But on the Turkish FA, they were looking at the referees because they were so concerned that referee might be biased. That referee might have been bought. That referee might have got a track record of always preferring a certain player or a certain time slot. And they take that stuff very, very seriously. The debate is not friendly. And I think that also sort of plays into the, I'd love it if all soccer conversation was friendly on social media, but it isn't. There's whole chunks of it where this sort of social media world. I'm talking with my 7-league CEO, Lewis Wiltshire, ex-Twitter. The two of us have been around the sort of social in this space for a while. And we sort of have this feeling that we're going to look back on a weird 10 to 15 year period where for some reason we allowed anybody on the internet to talk to anybody else on the internet. And that included just open conversation with elite level athletes. And that conversation, unfortunately, many times turns into just straightforward abuse. And then there's that whole kind of, okay, we need to put some sort of gated community. We need to have some control mechanism around that. And whatever technology it is that supplies that means that we go back to being fans who have a common purpose, who want to have a debate, and maybe a fairly serious debate, but that it doesn't tip over that edge into a place that's uncomfortable for everybody.
Thanks, Richard. We're going to switch gears now and kind of talk about the business side of sports. So let's just talk, so how are you seeing, Dan, new innovations and technologies improve the integrity of the business of sports? Sales, everything from sales of tickets, on-demand event viewing, merchandise, sports, racing equipment, etc.
Yeah, so I think this perhaps goes back to a bit more about the areas we focus on. So, I mean, we are directly involved in, for instance, looking at how do we protect merchandising. So, how do you make sure that as a fan, when you go and buy your favorite club atop, it is the correct club atop. You're buying something that's genuine. I mean, that goes into a much broader point around piracy and counterfeiting, which is a huge global problem. But there are technologies that are evolving which are giving you easier to deploy, but also, more importantly, easier for consumers to actually access and use. And so there's a lot of work going on around that to try and get to a point where you can give a consumer, maybe not 100%, but 99% certainty that what they're buying is genuine and real. And that could be a combination of physically applied anti-counterfeit features, but also other elements of data that you can give them to verify a product. So there's a lot of going into that, and ticketing is the other big thing. I mean, how do you make sure that, one, again, the ticket you're buying is genuine, but also it was touched on earlier on in a previous speech. Where are the tickets going, especially if they're being handed out as part of perhaps an official role, and where do they end up? And should they be given to those people, and what has happened to them, and has there been some payment associated with them, or should they be used as what they're meant for, which is obviously free, corporate guest type tickets? So there's a lot of technology that's coming forward that we can really enable people to track where things are. Is this the right one? Should this person have them, etc.? So I think that's growing more and more and more, just so that people, what they get is what they expect to get, and it's genuine, it's real.
So let's go to you, Richard. Richard, is this a problem that teams are recognizing out there?
Yeah, there's all manner of challenges for teams. I mean, particularly when you talk about having gone through a very difficult few years around COVID. But anything that will be able to protect your revenue. So Dan's example there about the merchandise, that's absolutely spot on. Ability to be able to connect to audiences and to be able to offer them a 100% transparent guaranteed experience is important. One of those options that everybody is excited to explore at the moment is using NFTs around ticket buying, because ticket touting is still a significant issue, and that verification of the pass on. There's also aspects around digital assets that I think are really interesting. And, I know the sort of Bored Apes, et cetera, there's artwork for sure. And NBA did a tremendous job in partnering with Dapper and going early with Top Shot, well done, good, first through the door, as the NBA so often are. But there are, that boom has gone very hyped and very excited, and then it's dropped down and everybody's kind of backed away from it a little bit, but it will reach what did Gartner call it, the plateau of productivity. We will get there at the point at which digital assets around sporting memorabilia, perhaps, around sporting moments. It may not necessarily be video clips. It might be the digital version of a ticket stub. I'm a ticket stub collector, so I have all mine from when I was a teenager onwards. That's a long time, but I don't get those anymore because I'm getting digital tickets, and I'd like something to go with that. So there's all sorts of add-ons that are useful that give, actually, as a club, give you the ability to be able to expand and grow your inventory. Another sort of reflection, slightly different. I had the pleasure of going to a few of the Euros games in last year, and that pleasure, unfortunately, at the final turned into a great discomfort because there were a whole bunch of crowd-related issues that went on there, and it triggered in my mind the sense of facial recognition software is, of course, getting better and better and better, and are there positive, heavily controlled, but positive ways that can be used in ticketing, in crowd control, in crowd management, in that kind of thing? When you talk about large-scale events or even just Premier League soccer matches, how are we using that to the benefit of the audience and to the benefit of the experience and the business behind it?
Sandra, what would you like to add?
I mean, I think, just to echo what everybody has just already said, I do think, in terms of just an opportunity from what I've seen, is that we know from COVID, we accelerated digitally, like we fast-paced 10 years. And so if you're already behind before COVID, you're really behind. And so what I would challenge the sports industry at large is that you have to make an investment in technology. We were talking about all the innovation that's happening. Every single innovation extracts data. You have to be able to analyze it, contextualize it, authenticate it, make sure that it's being used correctly. And so the big opportunity is making those big bets in technology. And I'm just not seeing the manifestation of building out technology hubs within the organization And oftentimes what I have seen transpired is, kind of a little bit profits at all costs, where you're going after sponsors in whether technology companies, and in that process, are those sponsors in technology, are they aligning to the vision that you have for your digital transformation? And so the big conversation to be had, I think, within the sports industry is all industries are accelerating very, very fast. It's a significant investment in terms of digital infrastructure. How do you think about the data, the intelligence that you're going to inject, the algorithms, challenging your technology partners, and making sure the partners that you're choosing, I understand the business is driven by sponsorship, pick those sponsors wisely that can help accelerate the vision that you have in terms of the overall digital experience that you want to deliver for your fans, the viewers, as well as your athletes and the operations at large.
Thank you for that, Sandra. So to kind of wrap up our panel session today, we'll go back to you, Dan, and in what ways can technology and innovation be harnessed to safeguard sports integrity? What are some of the ways, kind of the micro, or I should say the macro trends or technologies that really can be used to ensure integrity?
I think maybe just picking up on my own personal experience. So we did a lot of work with the FIA to look at how would they enforce things like the cost cap in Formula One, because a lot of the cost of putting a Formula One car on a grid is just the components. So it's really making sure, how do they, within the cost cap, how do they make sure the teams are actually complying and not surreptitiously putting in extra components, because every single one of those components, particularly on Formula One cars, is astronomically expensive. So I think I picked up on it earlier on. It's really just making sure that, if you have got a sort of cost-constrained environment, how do you make sure that you can actually track what is being put in or used under that cost cap, and having the technologies to do that? And there's all sorts of things you can do in terms of serialization and tracking and tracing. It's not that complex, which is why actually it would be relatively easy to put in there. And I think it's just the general authentication of what are you using? Is this component, this equipment, genuine? Is it the one that has been officiated as being okay to be used, and avoiding any performance enhancing by using, if you like, doctored equipment? And I think those are the sort of, in my experience, some of the big areas that really need to be focused on.
Nadia, do you have any stories or use cases or examples of how technology has been able to help with sports integrity?
I think technology is the key to helping with sports integrity. Obviously, it's transparency too amongst the organization and what you're putting into your company to help manage things. So at the end of the day, the most important thing with all this data that's being collected is protecting the fan, protecting the athlete, protecting the organization. So, making sure that you're up to date with the latest standards and keeping track of, the latest hacks and ways that people are getting in to try and grab that data is going to be the most important thing to do. But I think transparency in how you do it is the key to integrity there.
Thank you, Nadia. Sandra.
I'm going to echo what Nadia has said. Data will be the key to integrity. And I would just like to add on, the governance that will inform the data will be a critical conversation that we have to have industry at large, so that those that are building the technology are building it in a way that actually delivers integrity. So governance of the data will become key. The algorithms that are built into the AI and the automation will also be very critical.
Got it. Thank you. Richard, you have 1 minute for your answer.
Won't even take that. So many great points made by the other panelists here. I would just add on top of that, really, it's the people. It's the people that will make the difference in this. For all of our technology and all our regulation and all of our systems and computers, the reality is, when you're going through a digital transformation, and sport is still got a long way to go through digital transformation, then it's always the lawyers in your team. It's the sales guys who are doing deals that they don't really know what that's going to commit to in the next 5 years. It's the athletes. At Seven League, we have a star creation program that we run. We've run it with badminton. We're running it with rugby league, where we help those athletes get to grips with all the challenges that there are currently and make the best use of that tech. But all the way through the different parts of sport, from grassroots up, whether administrators or athletes. The digital DNA, the digital transformation capability, that's going to be the thing that helps sport adapt best to all of those incredible things that we haven't even mentioned that are still to come.
All right, thank you. And Nadia and Sandra, take the rest of the day off. The rest of you, we're back to work. Thank you.